Hello, and welcome to this bite-sized session on implementing successful smart working. I'm Sharon Young, and I'm going to share with you some pearls of wisdom that I've learnt over the years working with a number of organisations that have been trying to implement more flexible and smart ways of working. To accompany this session, we have a handout which you should be able to access online, and I suggest that you have that with you as we go through this session. It provides a little bit more information on some of the things we talk about, and also some space to fill in the various exercises that we're looking at. What you might want to do is to pause the video at various points and to work through those exercises before we move on to the first section. So we're talking about successful smart working. But before we get into how we make it successful, I think it's worth getting some clarity on exactly what we mean by smart working. So the first aspects of smart working as we know it today started around this idea of flexible working. So it was much more about when people worked. So we had the traditional days of people working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and having permanent contracts. Things have changed a lot since then. So we have a lot of people that will work sort of compressed hours, all of their hours in 4 days a week, working flexi time, working part-time, having job shares. We have people that maybe are just employed for seasonal parts of the year rather than for permanent contracts. So the way that we're working in terms of the hours and the days and the when people are working has changed dramatically. Then what's been happening more recently is what we call this idea of working anywhere. So this is about where you work. Again, traditionally, people used to come to a place of work. And smart working is about making work not somewhere that you go, but something that you do. This has become a big issue in recent years for people for a number of reasons. One of those is actually the cost of property. So in the challenging times we have, a lot of organisations are starting to realise how much money it's costing them to keep maintaining and lighting and heating huge offices where they've noticed that quite often a lot of desks are empty for a lot of the time. At the same time, we have a lot more technology now that's enabling us to work in different ways. You don't have to be sat at a desk to be able to work. All the different things that we have on our PCs and laptops today, and the internet and digital working and Wi-Fi makes it so much easier for people to work from anywhere. Working from home, working from a cafe, working on a train, you see people these days. So working anywhere is literally about that. It's about moving away from having your own desk, about having team areas, and working to much more collaborative working and choosing the right place to work. And then finally, the area that is often overlooked, but really is fundamental to really be working smart, is what it says here is business transformation. And this is about changing the way that we work. And it's not just about business transformation. You can certainly have some major organisational-wide transformation where things like business process re-engineering, about having paperless office, again using technology. But actually when we're talking about smart working, it's some of those small things that make a difference. So really it's about continuous improvement. Are we working in the best way we possibly can? So in summary, if we're talking about smart working, really it's just being thoughtful about what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and then choosing the location, the time and the way of working that's going to most help you to accomplish those outcomes. So bearing that in mind, there's a lot of potential benefits that individuals and organisations can get from smart working. But whenever I talk about it, a lot of people have some concerns and some worries about some of the risks of things that might happen, like loss of team spirit or customer service dropping because there aren't going to be enough people there. And so we've created at Pearlcatchers the successful smart working model. And this is a model for managers and organisations to look at if they want to maximise the benefits of smart working and to minimise some of the potential downsides if things are not managed appropriately. And what we're doing in this session is I'm going to talk you through each of the different aspects of this model and get you to be thinking about how it applies to you. Now in your worksheet you will find that there is a section around this and it details each of the 6 parts of the model, and for each of those it shows you some suggested key ingredients of things you might need to have to be successful in that area. I'm sure you can probably add your own as well that are particularly relevant to your organisation, so please feel free to do that. And you'll notice on the handout as well that there's a section for you to notice your current status. So how are you doing against those? What things have you got in place currently? What things are you missing? And then there's another column for you to think about what actions you need to take. So please, as we go through each area, stop as I talk at each thing and think about how you're doing currently in your area. So briefly to talk about this, the 6 different areas we have as the basic foundation, actually recognising what your customer needs are and making sure that you are delivering the service that they need. The apex at the top of that is around continuous improvement, about making sure we're constantly looking for the best way to do what we're doing. And then we have the 4 pillars. We have the 2 competence pillars, which are about the practical things, such as around your processes and skills and knowledge. And then we have the 2 contribution pillars, which are much more around the people side, about the role of the leader in smart working and about how we can create that team climate and culture, which is one of the areas people are particularly concerned about when people are not together all of the time. So we're going to start with looking at customer needs and service delivery. And to do that, I want to introduce you very briefly to the concept of systems thinking. It's a huge piece of work, but for now, I just want you to have some of the basic concepts. So what I'd like to do to describe the idea of systems thinking is to use the car as a metaphor. So systems thinking works on the basis of organisations as a system. So the first thing about a system is that it has a purpose. So if we're thinking about a car, what would you say is the purpose of a car? It's to get people or things from A to B, should we say. So you need to think about what is the purpose of your system. Now a system could be an organisation, it could be moved down to a particular department or service within an organisation, or it could also be moving up to a whole wider process, such as, for example, the criminal justice system, which works across various different organisations. But no matter what the size of system you are thinking about, it will start with its purpose. So if a car's purpose is to get people or things from A to B, we then need to think about who are the customers that use that system. And those customers will have slightly differing needs. So if we're talking about a rally driver, they still want to get from A to B, but for them, they need to get there quickly. If you're talking about a family man, he still wants to get there, but he wants to get there safely. Kind of get the idea. So it's really important at this point to think about who are the different types of customers that you have, and that can include internal customers, your partner organisations that you're working with, and think about what is the need that they have for your system that is its variation around your core purpose. Another thing about systems is they're made up of lots of different parts and interdependencies. It always makes me smile, that picture, just the amount of different parts that go into a car. And whilst the system is made up of parts, the key thing is the interdependencies. Every part within a system has got its own purpose that ultimately contributes towards the overall purpose of the overall system. But no one part within that system can achieve the overall aim on its own. So you might have the nicest, shiniest wheels on the planet, but if those wheels aren't attached to an axle that's attached to an engine that's got a full fuel tank, it's not going to get you from A to B. So a really key part in systems thinking is understanding what is your part, what's the part you play in a system, what are your interdependencies, so who are you dependent on, but also who's dependent on you. And then we start thinking about the nature of the demand that you have. And when you're getting demand in your working day, there's 2 types of demand. The first one is value demand. So that's the demand we actually want. That is the demand that is helping us to provide the service we are there to provide for our customers. So that is about us getting people from that A to B, whatever their A to B is. But we also spend a lot of our time in our working day on failure demand. And failure demand is anything that is caused by a failure to do something right, to do something first time, that means you have to do things differently or again, or not in the most effective way. So every time, for example, your communication is not clear and someone has to come back and check, that's failure demand. Every time that you have a customer complaint, that will be failure demand. Every time people don't deliver information to you that you need at the time you need it, that's failure demand. Every time you have a really long and bureaucratic process that is outdated, that's failure demand. Have a think about, in your day, how much of what you do you think is really value demand versus failure demand? And there was some research a number of years ago that identifies in the public sector particularly, usually around at least 60% of what people do every day has got some aspect of failure demand in it. And this is where it's important for us to make the link between the customer needs, service delivery, and then continuous improvement. So it's all very well to know what is the value demand that we want to be achieving, but actually if we're getting caught up in the failure demand, that could well mean that our service delivery will fail, particularly if we're not adopting techniques that are going to help us to be able to manage working in more flexible and remote ways. So this leads us on then to looking, as we said, at continuous improvement. And really it's about working smarter, not harder. In times of austerity, a lot of organisations are having to do more with less, and that means a lot of people are working hard. But I really love this quote that says, workaholics aren't heroes. They don't save the day. They use it up because they're so busy just working hard. The real hero is already home because she figured out a faster way to get things done. And that for me is the essence of continuous improvement. It's about not putting up with the way that things are. It's about looking for ways to improve things. And a great metaphor for this is something that we have here, which is a really nice clear metaphor. We're moving now from cars to much older technology in terms of carts. And take a minute to have a little look at this and just see what's the message you can see in there about failure demand and continuous improvement. Now, there is no right answer to this, but the fact that it's entitled Square Wheels gives you a little bit of a clue. The first thing here is that this cart has got square wheels. These square wheels do get you from A to B, but it does it very slow, very clunky, and it makes it really hard work for the people at the front and the back of the cart. And what we identify is every single organisation I've ever worked with, and I would suggest every organisation on the planet, has got some square wheels. Whether that's processes or habits, ways of working, there are things that make it clunky and hard for you to do your job. Doesn't mean you don't do it, just makes it a lot harder. But you'll also notice that in the cart you've got some round wheels, and most organisations will also have some round wheels. They might have alternative processes that some departments are doing but not everyone's doing. They might be good ideas that individuals have got, but you know what, they're just so busy trying to work with the square wheels that no one's got the time or energy or doesn't feel empowered enough to be able to say, why are we doing it this way? Isn't there a better way to do things? So continuous improvement is about getting the guys to step back from that cart for a minute and say, is there a better way of doing this? So if we're looking at a systems thinking approach to both the customer delivery and the improvement sides of things, it's really more about questions than answers to start with. So it's really getting clarity yourself. First of all, what's the aim of our system? What are we here to do? Who are our customers? What are their needs? What is the nature of their demand? And that's split between your failure and your value. A really important thing is, does everyone who is working in the system understand how they contribute to the aim, what their part is in the wider system? How capable is your system or your service of meeting its needs? And finally, looking at what's going on in the system that's preventing you from achieving your aims effectively and efficiently, and doing stuff about those things that you can. So take a little bit of time now to think about, how are you doing against what your customers need? Make sure you're focusing your time and your energy, what your customers really need rather than maybe what you've been delivering for the past 10, 20 years. And looking at your processes, are they really supporting you in being the quickest, most effective, most efficient ways of doing things? So now we've looked at the foundation, at the apex, we're going to move on to the specific different pillars. And we're going to start with looking at the competence pillars. As we said, there's 2 of those. The first one is around what we call work processes. And this is really about examining, for us to be working effectively in a smart way, what are the procedures and processes that need to be in place. Now, obviously, you will still need to have the various processes and procedures you had to do your day-to-day work already. But there's some other things you might need to think about specifically to enable you to work in a more smart way. Things like, for example, how are you going to allocate work when people aren't all in the workplace? How are you going to manage desk allocation, for example, if everybody does all come in at once? How are you going to manage those situations? How are you going to think about what minimum staffing levels you might need if you do have people that come to visit you at a particular location? How are you going to manage the ways that people are working flexibly? How are you going to manage lone workers so you know people are safe when they're not in the workplace? How are you going to manage communication so people don't feel isolated? And escalation, what happens if someone's got a problem? So it's worth thinking about, what are the things that you're going to need to have? Which of those have you got? What are your gaps? And what needs to either be implemented or changed if your current processes aren't going to be conducive to helping smart working? Then we move on to looking at the knowledge and skills that you need. And there's two aspects for this. So firstly, if you are going to have people working more remotely, you need to make sure that they have at least got the core skills they need to do their job without supervision. That's a fundamental aspect. Otherwise, it's not appropriate for a new starter to go working from home. But actually, we need to think about some additional skills that people might need to maximise working smartly. So from your professional skills, yes, you need to have your technical skills. You need to have your specialist knowledge. One thing for me that's really important is knowing about where are you going to get information. So having that wherewithal to know, if I don't know something and I'm working remotely, where do I go to get that information? And a really key thing for me is looking at people's IT skills. How can you maximise what technology can do for you? There are so many things around collaboration tools, for example, using technology that can really, really help you to be much more effective, to work much smarter. But a lot of people are very nervous of them and haven't ever been taught the best way to maximise what the features that are available in some of these different applications. So IT skills for me is really important. Let's look at what's coming on board with any kind of digital transformation that you're doing. How can I make sure that people in my area have got those skills? Then you've got your management skills. Obviously, as managers, we'll talk about managers later, it's how you're managing people. But as individuals, how are you managing your own work, your own productivity? Some people actually work much better when they're away from the office and they haven't got so many distractions, for example. But other people find it really hard to focus. So what can you do in terms of looking at how well you manage your time, your energy, and your focus to ensure that you're achieving your outcomes? Then looking at business knowledge, as we said before, where do you get the information? Who do you go and speak to? How do I find out what legal or regulatory things we need to work to? And then your personal skills. So things like, how do you cope with stress when people aren't together? You can't notice some of these signals that might be happening. Do we have people that are able to cope with stresses and worrying deadlines when they're on their own? People who maybe might struggle to communicate with people if they're not face to face. Again, learning to use some of the messaging tools and being able to adapt to change and the new ways of working. Some people like to work in the ways they've worked for a long time. So it's worth doing a bit of a skills audit for your team in terms of what are the skills and knowledge that you need, not just do the basic job, but to work in the new ways that are going to help you to be smarter and more effective. And then see what you need to work on. Is it skills for individuals? Is it skills that you need to have for everyone in the team? And start to create your own plan for increasing those skills and that knowledge where you need to. Moving over then to the contribution pillars and the people side. Leadership is a huge part of making smart working effective, and in fact it's a huge part of making any culture change sustainable for the future. Like it or not, managers, leaders are role models. People will do what you do, not what you tell them to do. It's really important that you are role modelling the behaviours, that you are working flexibly and that you are trusting people to do their work, that you're not micromanaging things every time. One of the biggest issues we've had when we've looked at helping managers to adopt smart ways of working is trust. The amount of times I've heard people say, well, how am I going to know they're doing their job if I can't see them? But how often do you literally sit next to someone and notice what they're doing? They could quite easily not be doing things where they are. So Trust and actually managing by outcomes are really, really important as leaders, making sure that people can see what is expected by what you're doing. Another thing that's really important is starting to use a wider range of leadership styles. Traditionally, we have the whole command and control style. I tell you to do it and you do it, which is the directing style we have at the bottom here. And there is still a part of that, and actually a core part of that that's really important moving forward is helping people to manage by outcomes. So if you want to know how people are doing, for me the really important thing is being clear with them about what it is you expect them to deliver and, if appropriate, when, and setting SMART objectives that are linked to your core outcomes, that are linked to your core purpose of your system. Once you can start doing that, that's how you measure whether or not people are achieving what you want them to achieve. But you also sometimes need to guide people. So this may be very much around how you give feedback. So not blaming people for mistakes necessarily, but actually looking and seeing why things have happened. If people are not performing the way you want to, giving them feedback that helps to redirect them to what you want them to be doing. If people are performing well, actually giving them reinforcement. So giving them feedback that shows them what you want to continue to do or to do more of. But as we start to move into more of the continuous improvement side of smart working, you need to be adopting some slightly different styles, which are stepping back. So adopting a much more coaching style with people, where you're not giving them the answers the whole time. Because the more you give them the answers, the more they'll come running to you next time they have a problem and asking you what to do. Leaders don't have all the answers, they don't know everything. And actually the best leaders are the ones that work with the potential of their staff and use a much more coaching approach where you ask open questions. Well, what do you think might be a good idea? What have you thought of before? How else could this work? And getting people to start coming up with things and working through the solutions, the problems themselves, and coming up with their own solutions. These are the things that will start people to be more comfortable identifying square wheels and coming to you with not just a problem, but what about doing this? And then as you have much more experienced staff, you'll be wanting to look at delegating things to them. It could be delegating particular tasks, it could be delegating decisions, helping them to become more empowered. And this is a really important part when people are working remotely, to make sure they are clear on what things can they just say, yep, I'm going to do that. What things are absolute no-goes that you need to say to them, nope, if there's a problem on this, come back to me. And where's that kind of middle ground? So think about the decisions that people might need to make when you're not around. Get them to think about those and have a look to see what level of autonomy you're going to offer people. So take a little bit of time to have a think about which of these styles you tend to use most often. And do you not use the other ones because you don't have the skill or confidence, or just because that's your natural style? Start to look at how you might be able to use some of the additional styles to get much better results for you and your team and your organisation. And if you feel that some of these are things that you haven't got the capability currently, then have a look at your personal development and see what development opportunities are available inside your organisation to help you develop, for example, coaching skills, better feedback skills, example. And do your own skills matrix on yourself as a leader to see how you can really develop into a truly smart leader. The second side of things from the contribution side is what we call the team cohesion, the team climate. And this is one of the areas that I know a lot of people are concerned about. How do we keep that team spirit if we're not together? But actually there are some teams in a lot of organisations, particularly global organisations, where they have never met, where people work totally remotely. So it is possible, but there's some really important things that you need to get behind that. So the first thing is around commitment and engagement. So getting that commitment to your team, getting that clarity around that purpose and people buying into that and being engaged with what they do is a really important first step. Cohesion and team spirit. So finding ways that you are going to interact as a team. Ideally have some occasions where you purposefully meet, ideally face-to-face, but if not, you can use all of the collaboration tools and the virtual meetings that we have available today. But finding ways of getting people to spend time together, and some of that being social time, getting to know each other a little bit more. Credibility and trust. That's about having that trust in each other and showing yourself to be credible in doing things. It's quite interesting when we talk about smart working that it's quite often our colleagues that are a little bit, oh, I'm sure they're working from home today, are they? And actually what happens in most cases, a lot of people work harder when they're at home because they're trying to overcome people's worry about being mistrusted in what they're doing. So show that trust with each other. And communication is absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical to everything we do every day, but it's so much more important. So a really good tip for me at this point is thinking about what are the different things that you might need to communicate about, and start to agree what are the tools that you're going to use for those. So actually a lot of organisations now use Messenger very, very regularly, just a quick, oh, hey guys, what's going on with this? So you can tap into people. And it's about realising just because you can't see someone doesn't mean they're not working. We need to overcome some of those things and start finding ways to communicate in much more digital ways that are going to maximise what is available, and keep in touch so you don't have to see each other to communicate with each other. So those are the 4 C's that we're looking at. So we've gone through now the 6 different sections. We've looked at customer needs and service delivery. We've looked at getting to continuous improvement. We've looked at the 4 different pillars. So we've looked at getting the right work processes, getting the right skills and knowledge, getting good leadership and control, and creating that team cohesion and that climate and culture within the team. So once you've gone through and you've done your initial assessment, what we need to say is, okay, where do we need to go from here? And this is where we look at the concept of SWOT. So a lot of you will be familiar with SWOT. Obviously, in the olden days, it was strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And we've done a slightly revamped version of it. But it's taken all of the notes from your sheet on what your current status is and any progress you've made, and thinking about what are our strengths, what are the things actually we've got that are pretty good that will support us in working in a much smarter way, and how can we build on those and maximise those. So it could be particular individuals that have already worked in other areas and you can use those skills. It could be actually we've got a really great communication process. Then looking at the areas where we can improve. So it's a slightly more positive term than weaknesses, because it might not be weaknesses, it may just be things you're not aware of. So where are things that you can improve? Could be things that we're not doing at all, we need to do and start from scratch. It could be some things, actually we're doing it quite well, but we could be even better, particularly if we're using continuous improvement. What are the opportunities that might be available to us that we can take from smart working? And what are some options we've got to overcome some of those issues? And then finally, our threats. So are there threats? Are there things we need to be aware of? So, an example threat is, if people are working remotely and people come to office, we're not here. Is that going to mean that people are going to think that we're not doing our job? How are we going to make sure that we're out there and we're showing people that we are available? There are other ways to communicate with us. And what are some other things to consider? Might not be a threat, but we maybe just need to bear this in mind. This is going on for us. It's important for us. As with all of these things, it's always much better if you can do these activities with a team of people, whether that's with your team of managers, whether that's with your actual team, people at the front line, but getting people's input on where you are in these things is really, really important. And then when you've done that, we need to move between actually just thinking about stuff and doing stuff. So this is where we move to the action planning stage. And to really successfully build and implement smart working in your area, take a little bit of time to think about what are things we need to stop doing? Stuff that we're doing now that is really not supporting us in terms of moving to the smart ways of working. What are things that we need to start doing? So we need to make sure that we are communicating and telling people where we are and having our lone worker, for example. What's some of the good stuff we're doing? We have really great team meetings. We need to make sure we're going to carry on doing those. And what's some things we need to change? What are some of those square wheels, those processes that are really making it hard for us that we need to look at changing? Now you can do this just working with a sheet that I gave you as part of the handout, but actually a really good way to do it in a group is to have flip charts around the room. So one for each of the 4 areas, and to get people in small groups, give them probably 4, maximum 5 minutes to jot down their first thoughts. Then go around all of the different flip charts. And from that point, you then get people back together and you have a conversation about what all this is telling you. And start thinking as a group, what can you do to prepare your team for smart working? And also think about what you as a leader can do to support them through that change process, because for some people, that's going to be quite hard. Moving away from my desk knowing that my friend is going to be sitting next to me the whole time. It's changing the psychological contract that your employees have with you. So some people will find that very hard to get used to. So how can you support your team and individuals in your team through moving through that? And then the final thing to think about, coming back to you as a leader, what do you personally need to do to make sure that you can effectively lead and manage smart working? So lead people into those ways of smart working, and on a day-to-day basis manage to make sure that your team are still performing the way they need to, that they are constantly improving in terms of the way they go with things. So this is our model for successful smart working. I've taken you through each of the different areas, and I've given you some ideas of some things that hopefully you can do to really implement that concept within your area. Please use the other information that we've got in the handouts, and I hope you found this session useful, and good luck with implementing smart working successfully into your organisation. Thank you.